you know how I was saying this story about how I was going about my life in this practice, not doing too well, but not really realizing I could do any better. And then I met Sydney Banks, and then I went back to San Francisco, and then my wife and I decided, hey, this is what we're teaching. You know, from now on, this is what we're teaching. We left the old practice behind. Well, a lot of my colleagues thought that was very, very courageous. Oh boy, that guy's got a lot of courage. But in actual fact, I had no choice whatsoever, because I could clearly see that there was a way to help people that was absolutely consistent with the human condition and with the way people are, absolutely. And the way I was doing it before wasn't consistent. It wasn't a way that was in the cards, you might say. Before I had I had this intervention model of fixing people and getting them to have a different experience. And when I met Sid, and I realized, you don't have to do that. You just have to understand. It's that simple. Now, it's not always easy to get to that point where you understand. People come up during the break and say, well, when's the penny gonna drop, George? Do you have any suggestions? You know, so I know it's not the easiest thing in the world. But so it didn't look to me like any courage, but I could see how it looked that way, because I went from a really secure practice where I was making a lot of money and people were, you know, kept coming to my seminars, to doing this other thing that was completely in the opposite direction. Well, as much as I gave up something good, something that wasn't right in my mind, for something else, Michael Neill did that way to a greater degree. In other words, Michael Neill had way more fame and fortune and way more reputation. The man's got all these successful books out. When he goes to speak, you know, they have to hire these big halls for him to go to. They can't use the phone booth that I used to talk in, you know, when I did seminars. So Michael Neill, in the world of George Pransky, is like a renowned, international renowned person, and he did what I did. He went from that status to saying, look, I see a whole different direction to go in. I know it's right, just as I said, because it absolutely worked for me in a way that nothing else even came close to. And this is the right way for me to help people. So I know when people said to me, well, you have a lot of courage and a lot of integrity and all that, I said, that's not true, I couldn't help it. I think that of Michael Neill. You know, he got this great thing going, and then he says, I'm gonna reverse directions and do this. And the beautiful thing about it is, that's what he's gonna talk about. He's gonna talk about how he sees helping people change what people need very differently now than he did back then. And in George Pransky's mind, he is at a high-level expert in what things were like back then. So I think we're very privileged to have someone who has made that shift and who can talk about it and give us insight into how the principles is different from everything else out there. So with that introduction, I'm so looking forward to listening to Michael. So,
I just want to check that I understood George correctly. What he said, if I got it right, is I'm not very courageous. I don't actually have any integrity particularly to speak of, and I've lost all my status. All right. I'm ready. Let's do it. I was trying to think what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell I'm going to sort of start at the end. I'm going to tell a story that to me, I don't know if it was the moment, but it certainly was a moment that let me know that I really don't do things the way I used to do them anymore. That I really have fundamentally, I see things differently. And consequently, I do things differently. And then I'm going to go back and sort of fill in the gaps of how I got there, not because I necessarily think it's a great story, it's a true story, but because in that story, I hope I'll be able to bring out some of the implications that I've seen in the principles that made it, as George said, honestly, a no-brainer. I could no more go back and do things the old way than somebody could purposefully drink rat poison on a sunny day when they're feeling happy. So I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to do that. I'm going to hopefully leave some time for any questions that are out there, if that's all right, Shaul, for questions, because I always like that. And then I'm going to finish with a story that is very personal and particular to my being here at Tikkun today. So this was the moment. I work in Hollywood, so I have a lot of sort of celebrity clients now. And one of my celebrity clients came to the office, and it's a TV actor, and was very worked up, very upset, really struggling, being messed about by this company, and just all the fun stuff that you read about in OK Magazine and go, really? Yeah, wow, God, look at that shirt. That's awesome. And before we started, we were just chatting. We were making tea upstairs. And he started telling me about the dream he'd had the night before. And just, dreams are great because they just go where they go. And it sounded like the setup for a joke, but basically, I'm going to adjust this a little bit. But essentially, the dream was he was on a private jet with his best friend and Saddam Hussein, who had been dead for 2 or 3 years at that point. So that should have tipped him off. It was a dream, but So he was on. They were on a plane, and somehow and they were off to have a wonderful time. They were going to Russia to party. I don't quite remember the details, but he said he suddenly realized, like midway through the flight to Russia, that Saddam Hussein was having an affair with his best friend's wife, and he got really worked up about what he should do about it. Because he didn't want to ruin their outing, right? I mean, they'd spent all that money on the plane. They were off to have this wonderful time, but he felt his sort of obligation to do. And he said he woke up exhausted, right, from just stressing about what to do about this. So, fast forward, we talk in the session, and as I find happens in sessions, we tend to talk about things like thought. Consciousness comes up from time to time, mind occasionally. And all of a sudden, he just gets that look in his eyes, that I've heard something you didn't say look. And I asked him what it was, and he had difficulty speaking. But when he spoke, he said that he had just seen that all of his stress about what was going on at work was down to that he never felt worthy. And he just saw it. He wasn't like somebody else could have said that to him and you would have gone, oh, yes, logical, psychological theory. He got it. He just got that's where it was coming from. And it was a beautiful moment of just clarity, like a complete letting go of that story, of that thought in the moment. And then he said, you could see his eyes shift. And he said, right, what do we do about it? And that was the moment where I knew that I saw things differently, because I was the king of technique, right? Those of you who followed my work, and it's okay if you didn't, but those of you who know me, I mean, I had a technique for everything. If it had 5 steps, I wrote it, and maybe added 2 more just to make it kind of cooler. And I just looked at him, and I noticed that I had no urge to fix it. I had no urge to make it better, and he kind of looked at me a bit funny, like, why aren't you fixing me? And I said, he said, well, come on, what are we going to do? And I said, well, why would we do something about it? And he said, well, I mean, this is huge. I mean, this is, a huge childhood issue. And I said, well, it strikes me that trying to do something about it would be a bit like trying to figure out how to sort out the situation between Saddam Hussein and your best friend. It never really happened. So why would we do something about it? And he saw that. He got it. It was just thought. Right? One of those two phrases George told you you'd hear a lot over the next few days. And that was, for me, that was a moment where I just got, wow, I can see that. Like, I didn't have to hold myself back from going in there and fixing it. I didn't have to talk myself out of doing that, make a choice between different methodologies. No, I think the three principles would be appropriate here. It was just obvious. There was nothing to fix. There was nothing wrong. He'd had a thought, it had looked really real to him, and then it didn't. And how I got there might take a little bit longer. So for me, I was very, as George said, I was very successful, best-selling books, doing very well. My second book was just about to come out in America. And Nina and I, my wife, we've been together, at that point, I guess we've been together probably about 20 years. I'm not sure exactly. But, and we were having what I call our annual fight. It's not about the same thing every year. But once a year, whether we needed it or not, we'd get into it about something. And I was complaining to a friend about it because, as the very wise rabbi said earlier, it was her fault. And I was kind of complaining to a friend, and he just said, "I don't want to hear it. Read this." I was like, "Fine, what is it?" And it was George's book. It was the Relationship Handbook. And I hate relationship books. Just as a rule, I think they're wonderful advice if you happen to be the author. Other than that, I see no relevance. But I had nothing better to do, so I thought, all right, I'll read it. And I kind of, the first chapter, I was like, that's interesting. I've never thought of it that way. And the second chapter, I was like, wow, and genuinely, I read a lot. I ran a couple of bookshops over here. I read everything. I remember one of the most disappointing days of my life was when I realized I was the expert on what was new. But this was genuinely something I'd never considered before. It was new. It was completely new to me. And it made a lot of sense, and I didn't think anything of it. And then about a week later, the friend said, "How are things with Nina?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, how are you getting on?" I said, "Great." He said, "Well, what about the fight?" I said, "What fight?" And it took him 2.5 minutes to remind me that we'd been in the worst fight we'd been in for years. And I thought, there might be something here. And so I started calling everybody. And for me, there's something kind of awesome about being here, because like everybody here was somebody I bugged to try and find out what they were really doing, pretty much. I didn't bug you, but I did your online course. And so I did. I walked into dinner last night, and I'm like, oh my God, you guys have no idea you're my heroes. But it was. I just called everybody. I called Elsie. I think she felt very sorry for me. And I just wanted to get it because I was so sure they were holding out on me when they said there wasn't a technique. I thought, okay, they seem like authentic people, so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and assume they just don't know what technique they're using. Okay, it's not that they're actually actively lying to me. They're just, but I can help. I'll go up, I'll figure it out, maybe I'll tell them what they're actually doing, it'll be great. So I go up to LeConner, you work with Keith Blevins, and now okay, I got to back up a little bit. So they suggested I read a couple of Sid's books, and good student, I went out, got Second Chance, got In Quest of the Pearl, got The Enlightened Gardener Revisited, read them all 3 times. Could not understand what the fuss was all about. Right? I mean, like, another name I could have given for this talk that would have been, suitable to my state of mind is The Principles. And? Because basically, if you haven't read the books, in a pure outline form, right, the story of each book is person in crisis, person with doubt, person with insecurity, stumbles across wise, ordinary human being. Wise, ordinary human being says, it's just thought. Person goes, oh my God! And I would read this and I would just go, what are they, and that's why I kept going back, because I'm like, I've got to be missing something. But I went up because I just thought, okay, if that's the price I have to pay to learn what they're really secretly doing that they're not telling me, I will come along and we'll talk about mind, consciousness, and thought. That'll be great. And for 2 days, Keith talked to me about it, and I went, people think. Yes, they do. I mean, I had no argument with him, right? He said, no. Everybody has the capacity to experience life. Yeah. And then the third one, it came out in different ways, obviously, but and he sort of said, well, we're part of a larger whole. There's an energy and intelligence behind life. And I wasn't quite as sure about that one, but I kind of felt that one. Like, I don't know if I loved the language, but I felt it. I knew that feeling. And about the second night, I really was wondering what I was doing there. Because it was nice. It really was. It was very pleasant. They were nice people. My wife would go, "How's it going?" And I'd go, "I don't know." They all talk really slow. I did. So the second night, Keith said, "Look, I want you to watch this video of Sid, this DVD." And I said, "Great," because I hadn't seen him. I just read the books. And I've got it on in the background, because at this point, I'm like, all right, I will do my homework, but... And I was having a meal in the room, and I remember this vividly because it was kind of ugly. But I had a beer halfway, like this, and Sid on the screen over there says, "Everybody in this world has innate mental health." I mean, literally, I just burst out laughing. And I didn't even know why I was laughing at first. And I think it was something about the fact that I was like halfway through the second beer as I was listening to this and realizing beyond a shadow of a doubt that that was true. And it was such a shock. Because I only was in this field because I was a suicidally depressed teenager. Like, that was it. I got into it because I didn't want to die. I did very well at that. And I found that the things that helped me not die, other people found useful. So I shared it. There was no pretense that it was more than that. But I did find I liked it. I did find I cared about people. I did find it was nice to not die with other people. It was. It just, there was a connection. There was something, I could hear them, they could hear me. And in fact, I'd already seen something about thought, though I didn't think about it that way. Because for me, what had happened, the thing that had popped it for me, was the night, absolute worst night. I'd been sobbing for a couple of days straight, and I was at university, and I was holding on to the wall because, and I'm sure there's a clinical explanation for this, I was being sucked out a fourth-story window by a giant vacuum cleaner in the sky. I don't think I really was, but that's what it felt like. And it really felt like if I let go of the wall, I was out. And there was a phone, and I reached down and I phoned the suicide hotline, and I got a busy signal. And I swear that saved my life, because I thought that was funny. Like even, it would be like the only thing funnier would have been if it had started to rain in the hotel room. And it kind of popped me out of it. I didn't know that's what was happening, but it did. It popped me out of my thinking. And I called a friend, and they got me. And over the next few days, I realized something. I realized I must not actually want to kill myself. Because for all the years I've spent thinking about it, I could have done it last night without any effort whatsoever. I went, holy cow, it's just a thought. This was before I'd heard about Sid, but I did. I saw it was just a thought. And once I saw it was just a thought, it wasn't a scary thought particularly. It was just a thought. It wasn't a significant thought even. But everyone had told me it was, and it seemed like it should be. So I'd given it a lot of my energy, like Judy was saying this morning. I'd really invested a lot of behavior in preventing that thought. So of course, it got stronger right along with me, right? And sideline, but I always feel I should tell this bit of the story. it was about 7 years before I told Nina about this, because by the time I'd met her, I was kind of past that. And I told her the story, and she said, "Oh, I've got one of those. I call it the divorce thought." And apparently, from time to time, she wasn't entirely happy with my behavior, and it occurred to her, this is never going to work. I should get out. And then one day she just realized, I don't want out. I like being married. I don't like this, but I like this. And so we kind of shared that, even though we had no context for it. So as I was listening to them talk about it, I could sort of relate it. And I could sort of relate that to my life. And so I made my living, I made my mark in a way, because I had gotten very good at doing what I thought it took to not die. So I had created, I called it behavioral Prozac, and a set of rituals and routines and techniques and strategies that if you did them and if you practiced them and if you programmed them in, they really worked. I mean, you could keep going. The only problem was if you stopped. And I knew, I wasn't unduly worried about it, but I knew I was 2 weeks away. Right? If I didn't do that for 2 weeks and had a particularly bad couple of weeks, I knew it was over. But 2 weeks seemed like a lifetime to me. That was fine. I was never going to go 2 weeks. And it was the best I had, and it seemed to really help people, and the book did well. I got lovely letters from people thanking me for it. And the book, as I say, was about to come out in the U.S. And I suddenly realized, in that moment, listening to Sid, that I was 180 degrees wrong. I just had it backwards. That it wasn't that well-being was this thing you could attain. Well-being was the default. Misery was something you could attain. I was just so darn good at attaining it that I thought that was the default. And it was obvious. It was like when people are telling these stories. There was no, gee, let me think about that. It was just obvious to me that that's how it was. And I was just kind of gobsmacked. That was the last thing I expected to see when I went up there. I thought I might find something useful. It never occurred to me I would find something true. And that, for me, was one of the first things that made me go, wow, about the principles, was that there was a truth behind it. Honestly, I know, as I'm saying it, I'm going, wow, that's cynical of me, that it didn't even occur to me that there could be a truth behind something. But it hadn't. I was in the business of finding the most useful lie to tell yourself and your client to get through life. And I had some really useful lies. Right? It was very effective. It hadn't occurred to me there might be another option. And it really messed up the book tour. Because I'm going out there and I'm being interviewed, and it was the first interview was where I had to kind of put up or shut up. Where they had the set of questions that the publisher had put out, and I just, everything the guy would say is, I started saying in the interview, I'd say, well, yeah, I mean, that's all true, but really, our well-being's innate. There's nothing you need to do. And the first interviewer clearly was totally flummoxed, because he kept going back, yeah, but on page 417, you say that technique number 48 is very... And I was going, well, yeah, I mean, that could help in the moment, I suppose, but really, you don't need to do that. Never got asked back on that show. I don't know why. But I found a way of talking about it. I found a better way of prepping it and contextualizing it, and it was fun. And the implications of that implication go on and on and on. Right? Innate mental health isn't really the principles, but it is one of the fundamental implications that if we have the gift of consciousness, and if there is this universal or divine consciousness that is there before thought, then how could that possibly get affected by thought? I mean, to me, it's like, if you're down on the ground, what's going up in the sky really matters, right? The weather really matters. I need to prepare for all kinds of weather when I'm down on the ground. If I'm in the sky, it doesn't really matter what kind of weather I'm having. And that was what I saw, is that, and if you'll pardon me, holy crap, we're the sky. You know, this is innate. This is our nature. And so what I started to see, because I'd already sort of had a little bit of insight about thought, is, oh, so when I'm not feeling that, it's because I'm thinking my way out of it. And I just don't understand that's what's happening. And I find in my work, attribution is one of the most fundamental things that affect our lives, is what we attribute our well-being to and what we attribute our suffering to. And as long as I was attributing my well-being to a technique, well, guess where I'd go next time I didn't have it? Find a bigger, better technique. When I attributed it to a teacher or a teaching, where would I go next? Back to the teacher to find a better teacher. Back to the teaching or to find a better teaching. Right? If I thought, and there was a time where I thought it might be drugs, I never got really into it. But it did occur to me that maybe that was the way out. Well, during that time, that's where I went. I'm obviously not doing the right drugs. And each one of these things was just common sense, to the extent that I thought that that was where my well-being was coming from. The second I saw that my well-being wasn't coming from anywhere, it was just part of who I am, then when I wasn't feeling it, I didn't need to go anywhere to get it back. I kind of just needed to wait. And one of the things that made it easier to wait was beginning to see my thinking take me out of it and then settle and fall right back into it. And there came a day, there was a very specific day, and I remember it, where I got up in the morning in this beautiful feeling. And, you know, when you're in a beautiful feeling, things are beautiful. And I walked out into the world, and I saw, the first person I saw them thinking. It's the only way I can explain it. And then I saw the next person thinking. And I saw everyone, I saw them thinking their way in and out of all these feelings. And I went, oh my God, people think! And then I went, oh no, I'm a character in a Sid Banks novel. I did, that was my thought, you know? It's like, who knew? So, if that was all I'd seen, I would be forever grateful, because that changed my life. Because I was no longer a really high-functioning depressed person. I mean, do I still think dark thoughts? Oh, you wouldn't want to be in there. Do I care? No. I mean, it just doesn't matter. They just don't seem important in the way that they used to, and consequently, they don't really hang out much. You know, there's nothing for them there. And so that was the thing, is I was pretty good at not being scared of the world. Because even when I was at the worst of my depression, I was loved. My parents loved me. We had enough. I had good friends. I did well at school. Even I knew it couldn't be my life. I had nothing to blame. And it kind of pissed me off a little bit, but I went with it. But I thought, so it must be me. Since it's clearly not my circumstances, it must be me. I must be broken. And the second I saw that I wasn't, there was nothing left to do. And that's kind of life-changing. You find yourself, or I did, with a heck of a lot of free time. I'm seriously, I started playing Angry Birds and stuff, because I just, because I still did the same amount of work, but there just wasn't that much to do in between times. I just hung out, you know. My kids got to know me on a first-name basis. It was great. So, the next big holy crap for me, the next big insight, the next big wow, I just had no idea, came when I was walking on a beach. I live in LA now. And I was walking on the beach with Sandy Crott, who's another person who's worked a lot with George and Aaron and Mara. And we were talking about the principles, and And I kept asking her, now, what's consciousness again? And okay, now thought, and I wasn't really aware that what I was doing, and she finally stopped and said, why are you asking me this? And I stopped to think about it, and I went, because I want to be sure I understand what it is that you're saying so I can decide whether or not I agree with it. Now, even I suspected there was something flawed in that strategy. Didn't know what, but I kind of knew that was unlikely to get me where I wanted to go. And we started looking behind the words. So not to the concept of thought, but to the fact of thought. Now, I can't tell you what I saw, because that's taking it right back into the concept of thought, but I can tell you I saw something very different than when I was looking at the concept. I looked behind the word consciousness or the definition consciousness at my experience of experiencing. I started talking slower. This is, God, who was it? Leslie Miller, another wonderful principals woman up in Seattle. I chatted to her. She was one of the people I pestered on the phone. And because I got stuck on mind. Like I could look to the fact of thought, I could look to the fact of consciousness, but mind, it was like, well, where's that? And I said to her, I said, she was saying, well, just look to mind. And I was like, I don't know where to look. I said, oh, I've heard that a lot. She said, just look where you don't know where to look. And in a funny way, that kind of helped. Because I realized I was trying to make it into a thing and find it and look at it. It's no thing. And if you're listening to this, going, oh my God, what is he saying? That was me. And if you stay in the conversation, you're going to see something extraordinarily beautiful at some point, I promise you. Now, what's interesting is that coming from where I came from, where it was all about control, right? How quickly can we do it? Right? That was our thing, was we were quicker than any other therapy out there. We were quicker than any other coaching technology. Like, it takes you 7 days, we can do it in 2. It takes you a day, we can do it in an hour. And it was, and that was our thing. It was hard to give that up. Because I liked that sense that not only can I tell you, yes, I can help, it should take about this long, and it'll cost about this much. Right? That just worked for me. It was simple. Right? It doesn't work with this, because I haven't found a way, and in fact, I stopped looking a couple years ago, to make the insight happen. Because what I found is everything I tried to make the insight happen, it's like the thing they put on the end of your head to get the donkey to move. It's like, I've almost got it. You start chasing it, it gets further and further away. One of the best metaphors that just we stumbled across, I do a radio call-in show, and somebody called in, and they were very busy mind. And they wanted to know, they said, okay, I just have 4 questions. I just want to know about this, and then what about this? And then after we talk about that, could we talk about that? And then could we talk about that? And I've got about 3 minutes with each person. So I stopped her and I said, let me ask you something. If I gave you a bowl of murky water, and I asked you to make it clear, how would you do it? And she said, well, I'd boil it. And I thought, well, yeah, that's what she's doing. Now, of course, if you boil murky water, you get really hot, murky water. So if you actually want murky water to settle, you let it sit. And it settles because the nature of water is clear. It's the nature of consciousness, too. And it was so fundamentally different to anything I knew that there's just been a learning curve, And so I still, not so much recently, in fairness, but for a long time, I thought I was doing the principles. And, George or somebody else would go, why aren't you doing the principles? I go, what do you mean? And it was just because I couldn't see. I couldn't see that I was so in the doingness of it that it just seemed like so much less doing. Doesn't that count? And that points to, for me, another one of the implications of the principles. You can't apply the principles. Right? That would be like, I'm planning on going for a walk. How do I apply gravity? No. Gravity, there are applications of gravity that will affect your walking. And if you see them, if you understand them, if you need me to take that, if you see them and understand them, then that does make it easier to walk, and it certainly makes it easier to understand what's happening when you stumble. And so you don't beat yourself up about it so much, because I mean, if you didn't know about gravity, right? Right? And you're walking along and you're like, whoa, what happened? Right? It would be terrifying. Right? But you understand a little something about gravity, and it's like, oh, it's just gravity. So the other day, literally 3 nights ago, I had a panic attack. I haven't had a panic attack in 4 or 5 years, and I haven't had a panic attack since back in the day. And it was really interesting. I was in a restaurant. It was my brother-in-law's birthday. We were having a lovely time. And I just suddenly, it was like, I thought, my hands are swelling up, and I couldn't breathe. And so I said to my wife, I'm just going to go outside for a minute. And I went outside, and I caught my breath, and I went back in. That was it. And it only occurred to me later that probably was something that I might have panicked about before. Right? I don't know what it was. It doesn't really matter. I know it was thought. I got caught up in some thinking. I didn't see it. Blindsided me. Passed. That's it. There's something beautiful about not having to be afraid. Because if what's outside me can't get me, and what's inside me can't get me, I mean, where am I going to fall? It's all me, right? It's all mind. What can happen? Except I get caught up in some thought, and it all feels separate, and then the other 360 fields of psychology apply again. Right? As soon as I separate out, as soon as I go back to being a separate me, and it's all out there, and it's all coming from the outside in, then everything I've studied about success works again. Right? It's not that stuff has no application. It just stops making any sense when you see the inside-out nature of how we create our experience. I mean, if it was really coming from the outside, it would be worth doing a lot of stuff to get it. Right? If my happiness was really going to come from my success, well, I should sacrifice for it. It at least makes sense. It would at least be worth consideration. If the only way I was going to get love was through sacrifice, right? Then even if I didn't like it, I would at least consider it. But the moment you see that that's not how it works, it's just, we've only got it completely backwards. Life gets remarkably simple. Even success gets really simple, right? If I want to get somewhere, right, and I don't have a lot of thinking about it, I start walking that way. If there's a chair in my way, I go, oh no, there's a chair in my way. And I move on. And sometimes I won't get there, but you know what? A lot of the time I will. I might not get there as quickly as I thought. When I get there, it might not be quite what I thought it was, but it's no big deal. But because we invest it, right? Because we invest our happiness, our well-being, our thinking out there, now it's like, boy, if I get that, everything's going to be awesome. But if I don't get it, then my mom was right about me. I didn't really want it anyways. And and all the stuff, self-sabotage, and all the psychological theories about success and about happiness, they all start to make sense again. Because those are the implications of an outside-in world, where what happens outside determines our experience. It just happens to be wrong. Again, if that was all I had ever seen, how cool, right? Very, very content with that. We're very, very fortunate. But one of the things that I love about this is I not only keep seeing things, but from everyone I have talked to, I get that that's how it works. And that takes me to another implication of the principles, is if if we're only ever a thought away, like Judy was saying this morning, then we live in a world of infinite possibility. Now, that would be scary to me. Like when I first contemplated that, when I first thought about, geez, I'm only one thought away from anything. Well, that means I'm only one thought away from all the bad stuff too, right? But and I'll tell you how it happened. I wanted to read something that Shaw wrote. And I want to read this because it's beginning to sound to me like maybe I'm telling you how to think, and that's not my intention in telling these stories. So our aim for this conference is not simply that you learn from the very special teachers, right, who are here and available. It's also that you learn from the hundreds of people who are here to participate, and ultimately, our aim is that you learn from no one but yourself. Don't try to understand what someone else knows. Instead, try to allow their wisdom to be a guide for your own. Your wisdom might look very similar to theirs, but knowing what you know and knowing what someone else knows is as different as light and day. And I think that's supposed to be night and day, but I don't know, maybe not. And so I want to keep going, but I want to put that in. Okay, this is Mike's story as a finger pointing. It's a very pretty finger, but it's nothing compared to what it's pointing to. So I was talking to Sandy. So I mentioned Sandy walking on the beach, talking to Sandy, and she said something that I didn't even hear. I thought what she said was, I was talking about some problem I was having, and I thought what she said is, well, you don't have to think about it. And it was sort of like, you know, doctor, it hurts when I do this. Well, don't do it. Right? I mean, it's true, but it's kind of annoying. But that's not what she said. She actually, what she said when she repeated it was, you don't have to think that. You don't have to think that. Whatever you're thinking, you don't have to think that. There is an arbitrariness to what we think. And we don't have to think that. We don't have to not think it. But just because we've thought it one way for 20, 30, 40, 50 years doesn't mean we have to think it in this next moment. We can think something new. Now, here's the last piece I want to put in, because for me, this was one of the most startling implications that I've seen so far about the principles. And it's to do with this intelligence behind life thing. I got that the mechanism is designed to heal itself, like the physical mechanism, right? That was apparent to me from a very early time. I cut my finger. I don't sit there going, heal, heal. I mean, I might, but I know that as long as I basically keep it clean, take care of it, it will heal. It's designed to do that. I didn't realize that the same thing is true of the mind. That same intelligence, that same intrinsic order that causes our body to mend itself, to reset, is true of the mind as well. And that's what took the sort of, oh my goodness, I could think anything. That's what stopped that being scary, because the direction my thoughts will naturally go is towards health. And for me, that is one of the most hopeful and comforting insights I've had, is that it's not just I don't have to do a lot. The less I mess with it, the more beautifully it unfolds. And it's something I call the kindness of the design. Because to me, it seems like there is something incredibly kind about a universe where the less I stress, the less I try and make things right, the more perfectly they unfold. Where if I really want to help another human being, the best thing I can do is find a beautiful feeling inside me. Worst case, I have a beautiful feeling. Best case, we both do. And for me, that I hope I will get a chance to talk to you guys again at some point. And I hope I'll have a whole new set of implications of the principles. But you know what? If I don't care. Nothing personal. Because in a funny way, and it will be the same without me. So I've run way over, and I want to see if maybe I have time for 2 questions, and then I do want a quick story at the end. So if they're out there, if you raise your hand, somebody's running around with a microphone. Going once. All the way at the back. Good. You made it all the way up here? Do, 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 do.
Question with 3 small parts. First, simply, when did you become a character in a Sydney Banks novel?
When did I become?
When did you have this realization? It was fairly recent, was it?
The first, I read Relationship Handbook in 2007, and the first, holy crap was in early 2008. February 2008, because we watched the Patriots lose the Super Bowl shortly thereafter. Just put that inside-out understanding to the test right there.
Okay, thank you. And how do you work with your clients now, Michael? I've been following your work for a few years now, although only since 2008, so that's quite interesting because I've read your books and now I'm knowing about the transformation outside of your books is very interesting. But how do you work with your clients now? Do you still have the same kind of clients but work in a different way?
There's a wonderful breakout panel tomorrow afternoon on coaching and the principles.
I'll be there.
And that would be a great place. I'd love it if you bring that up there because that's one of the things we want to talk about in that panel.
Great. I'm a coach and a mentor as well, so I'm going to be all ears.
Yeah, please come along.
And the third part, if I can be cheeky, is just about some of the principles, if I can call them that are in your books, in your publications, which I always resonated in because a lot of them were around thoughts creating your reality. And around what I used to think, until I came across the 3 principles very recently, was an inside-out approach. So I suppose my question is, and I'm not sure what it is around whether you already had a bridge to it in your previous work, although what you're saying now is that it was almost night and day, your approach to work and the techniques
I would
and
say,
modeling.
we've now trained people over the last couple of years in this approach through this Super Coach Academy that I run. What we've noticed in the 2 years we've run it so far is the less experience people had, the quicker they get it. Now, that doesn't mean you can't overcome your intellect and training. I feel I've done a fairly good job overcoming mine. But it's certainly not an advantage, in my experience. I want to finish with a story. I apologize that I went a little over with that. But when Shaw called to ask me to do this, I'd heard of the Tikkun Center. I didn't really know much about it. I read a bit about it. But I actually already had a very strong connection with the Word. And that connection came from, as all great spiritual insights do, a spy novel that I read on a plane about this Israeli spy and art restorer, Gabriel Allon. And this is the section that when I read this, I got a real insight into what I wanted to make my life about, and in fact, what it had already been about. Siona made a bed for Gabriel on the living room couch and told him the midrash of the broken vessel. Before God created the world, there was only God. When God decided to create the world, God pulled back in order to create a space for the world. It was in that space that the universe was formed. But now, in that space, there was no God. God created divine sparks, light, to be placed back into God's creation. When God created light and placed light inside of creation, special containers were prepared to hold it. But there was an accident, a cosmic accident. The containers broke. The universe became filled with sparks of God's divine light and shards of broken containers. It's a lovely story, Gabriel said, helping Siona tuck the ends of a sheet beneath the couch cushions. But what does it have to do with my mother? The Midrash teaches us that until the sparks of God's light are gathered together, the task of creation will not be complete. As Jews, this is our solemn duty. We call it Tikkun Olam, repair of the world. I can restore many things, Siona, but I'm afraid the world is too broad a canvas with far too much damage. So start small. And for me, and thank you for the soundtrack, that's nice. There is something beautiful. Chip, you and I talked about this last week. There is something incredibly beautiful about seeing the light come back on in someone's eyes. I always say it's the second best feeling I know. The first is the light coming back on in mine. And for those of you who do decide that this is work you want to do, I really think that part of the gift of the principles is it's an understanding that allows us to finish the repair of the world. And thank you for your time.
Not much mopping up to do there. That was great.
A couple of things and then just follow.
Yeah, and then just call it a day.
No, that was incredible. I just wanted to point out from the day that the common denominator, the thing everybody says, is that there's something inside us that when it's realized, everything changes. And then when it changes, it seems very natural. It seems like that's the way we really are. And if you look back, you'll see that everybody said that. And I love the way Michael talked about it. He talked about the fact that until you know this, you feel like you have to use one of the techniques of the 400 therapies that are out there to fix your experience. And once you realize it, there's nothing to fix. It's all there for you. And the only thing that you need is an understanding of what thought is and seeing life as thought. That's it. And that's what I heard in everybody that was talking. So we're on tomorrow at 9:30, right, Charles? The teachers will stick around a little bit afterwards in case you want to ask any lingering questions. And otherwise, we'll see you promptly at 9:30 tomorrow. And don't forget to bring your name tags with you.